Is it safe to say that Spider-Man has the best rogues gallery out of any Marvel superhero? I mean, come on, who doesn't love to see Spidey fight a guy with giant mechanical arms, or a guy who dresses up like a goblin, or a guy who's just really good at magic tricks? It's always a treat. But what would you say are the most powerful weapons that Spider-Man villains use to inflict pain on our favorite neighborhood webhead? Come on, there's gotta be a ranking, right? Well, that's what we're doing today. Join me as I discuss some of the most creative and the most dangerous gadgets or weapons Spidey villains use in order to confound, confuse, and just overall hurt Spider-Man. Did your favorite make the list? Let's find out. Right off the bat, let's talk about Spidey's most useful ability. No, it's not a pretty impressive display of sewing prowess in order to stitch his suits together, but rather it's his spider sense, or as the MCU calls it, the Peter Tingle.
Please do not start calling it my Peter Tingle.
Yeah, not a great name, but I guess an accurate one. Anyway, the spider sense is Peter's best ability. It's a tingling at the back of his skull that allows him to sense danger or to know when something's just not right. Sometimes the sense is open to interpretation, where Peter will get that special tingle but not quite know what's wrong. But if Peter really taps into it and focuses, it makes it so he can fight without having to open his eyes. If he's blinded and can't hear, Spider-Man can still kick your butt by relying solely on the spider sense. Eventually, the Marvel Universe revealed the true source of the spider sense. As revealed in certain Spider-Verse stories, the spider sense's technical name is arachnofrequency and is related to a cosmic force known as the Web of Life and Destiny. Basically, every Spider-Man in every universe has an innate connection to the world around them, and it's like a web strand across all these different universes are all connected. Man, you think way back in the early days of Spider-Man comics when they introduced the spider sense, they had any idea that eventually they would tie that power in with the multiverse and cosmic forces and webs of life and destiny? That's pretty wild. So spider sense is insanely powerful, so now let's talk about a weapon that can hurt it. And I think the villains that properly know how to counteract that all-powerful spider sense are the Goblins and Mysterio. So Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, and the Fishbowl Head all have used a type of hallucinogenic gas that not only confuses and disorients Spider-Man, but also makes it so his spider sense doesn't work properly. That gives the villains a massive advantage, especially for Mysterio. Like, if the Goblins don't have this weapon, they can still put up a pretty solid fight against the Webhead. But this is something the Master of Illusions, Mysterio, definitely needs in order to stand a chance. Because, like we saw in the MCU, Mysterio's illusions mean nothing to Peter if the hero can use his spider sense, so the hallucinogenic gas is key to Mysterio's success. There are those who are hoping Jake Gyllenhaal's Quentin Beck is still alive, and if he is, he'll need to get his hands on some of this stuff in order to stand a chance next time. So on this list, I'm going to be talking about a lot of familiar villains that we all know and love, but I also wanted to give some attention to some Spidey foes who just haven't had their time to shine yet. So that's where John Jameson, the son of J. Jonah Jameson, comes into play. Now, this guy has had a rocky time in his life and has basically sent the message to all the little kids who want to grow up to be an astronaut to absolutely not do it because space is pretty scary. One of his earlier jaunts through the stars ended when he contracted a space virus that increased his strength and size to superhuman levels. He had a specialty Jupiter suit made, but the virus was hurting his psyche, so Spider-Man had to electrocute that out of him and return him to normal. Now, you could argue that's enough adventure for one lifetime, but then Marvel writers were like, hey, you know what? Let's mess with this character again. And in a later storyline, Jameson was sent to the moon to collect space rocks and accidentally stumbled upon a powerful artifact known as the God Stone. Now, here's the real meat of this entry. The God Stone turned out to be the crystallized power and essence of Star God, an ancient ruler from another dimension. The explanation was that while he was growing weaker and soon would perish, Star God channeled his energy into this gem and sent it to our dimension, and whoever found the stone would transform into the form of Star God. But the radiation was so weak that the change can only happen when the moon shines on it. So yep, that's how John Jameson became Man-Wolf. He felt unnaturally drawn to the gemstone and started wearing it around his neck, only to discover that during a full moon, he'd transform into a powerful, ferocious wolf monster. After he realized what was happening, John realized the Godstone was fused with his body, so he was stuck with this curse until Spider-Man found a way to help. Only that didn't last long. After various adventures like using the Godstone to travel to its home dimension to help the denizens out from being conquered, John Jameson found the Godstone had sunk into his skin and was slowly turning into a malignant organism that was proving to be fatal to him. Thankfully, Spider-Man was around to help him out again, but seriously, the Godstone should not be messed with. So, the message again here is if you find a giant glowing gem on the moon, just ignore it and move on, okay? The Vulture in the comics really shouldn't be as strong of a villain as he is. Like, he's this old as dirt dude who invents this anti-gravity harness that allows him to fly perfectly, and instead of taking it on joyrides across the world to save on air travel, he uses it for crime since he's such a bitter man. But the harness itself deserves to be talked about. In the early days, Adrian Toomes was always upgrading his fantastic invention. Like, after Spider-Man and Vulture's first tussle, which ended with Spider-Man using an anti-magnetic inverter to damage the wings, Toomes went back to the drawing board and fixed the flaw. That's the type of man Toomes is. And besides just giving Toomes the ability to fly silently and with precise maneuverability, the harness also increases Toomes' strength, which is good because, again, in the comics, he's basically at the age where he should just be eating tapioca pudding in some retirement home somewhere. That enhanced strength allows him to survive hits from Spider-Man. I mean, how guilty do you think Spider-Man would feel if while he's fighting Vulture, he punches Toomes in the face once and the old man's skull turns to dust? Yeah, that doesn't sound very heroic. The harness that he wears at one point even was able to absorb the life force of Toomes' enemies when it came in contact with them, something that made him an even more powerful villain. So given all the suit can do, yeah, it's pretty powerful. Now, the MCU version of the suit looked awesome, but admittedly didn't seem as precise. It was incredibly bulky, and it will be interesting to see if Vulture ever returns in some capacity, if another flight suit will be sleeker. That way we can set up an air race between Falcon, aka the new Captain America, and the new Vulture. That'd be fun, right? One major villain that we've seen teased in the MCU but without any significant payoff is Mac Gargan, aka the Scorpion. He was present in Spider-Man Homecoming and then teased how he wanted to team up with the Vulture at the end, but that's all we've seen of him. Then Peter got caught up with dealing with the loss of his mentor, and now will have his hands full with fighting returning multiverse villains that I'm not sure they'll have any time for Scorpion anymore. Which is a shame because Scorpion is a fun villain. So although the character of Mac Gargan is enhanced with super strength and durability, the real draw to this character is when he puts on the Scorpion suit and utilizes his powerful scorpion tail to cause damage. Like, I really can't decide if this is the best or the worst weapon in Spider-Man history. I mean, for one, it's smart to keep your arms and legs free so that you can punch, kick, grab, etc., while also having a surprise tail to hurt enemies. But on the other hand, a tail that big seems unruly and hard to manage. But hey, if it works for Gargan, so be it. And it seems he's got a good handle on it. I mean, how couldn't he? The Scorpion suit helps establish a cybernetic link to the muscles in his spinal column, which allows him to activate the tail with mental commands because, sure, why not? Originally, the tail could swing at speeds over 90 miles per hour and could help launch Gargan to certain places and help protect him against attacks, which already sounds like a lot to deal with, but over the years, the tail was upgraded with things like armor, poisonous venom, electrical blasts, laser blasts, acid, and even mace gas. So yeah, this is a powerful weapon that easily counters Spider-Man's dexterity since it moves so darn fast. So in case it wasn't obvious, J. Jonah Jameson absolutely hates Spider-Man, and it was only a matter of time before he did something about it. He ended up employing Spencer Smythe to defeat Spider-Man, and this led to a long line of Spider Slayer robots that were created in order to bring the webhead down once and for all. So I think the Spider Slayers are dangerous because they just keep upgrading and evolving. Like, they started with simple designs created by Spencer Smythe, and the Slayers were sometimes piloted by J. Jonah Jameson himself. Over time, as each robot kept getting defeated, Smythe became more obsessed to create the perfect machine, and that led to him be fatally contaminated with radiation poisoning. After that, Spencer's son, Alistair, really stepped up the game, not only creating even more dangerous Spider Slayers, but also eventually using genetic experimentation to turn himself into a humanoid version of his robotic creations. But of course, Spider-Man stopped him as well. Overall, the Spider Slayers are just a nuisance and keep making life harder on Peter Parker. Like, every time he defeats one, he's just gotta know that a more powerful one will soon be at his doorstep, and he usually can't beat them in the same way twice. However the Spider Slayer is destroyed or whatever weakness it shows, the next version will have fixed that flaw. What a hassle. One controversial villain that I'm not sure we'll ever see in any Spider-Man film is Dr. Miles Warren, aka the Jackal. He's responsible for one of the most controversial storylines in Spider-Man comics, but I'm not really here to discuss that. Instead, I want to devote time to the powerful and dangerous Carrion virus. This started as a serum created by Warren that was developed from DNA samples taken from human donors in an effort to make the New Men, which are an artificial race of human-sized animals, look more like human beings. Good luck with that. But of course, something went wrong with the serum and turned the people who took it into basically living corpses, which is a little terrifying. This was a stepping stone for the Carrion virus, and over the years, this biological weapon kept evolving into different, more dangerous strains. But something even crazier with this virus is that it led to the villain known as Carrion, who is basically like a walking, talking version of the virus come to life. This villain's power allowed him to decay organic material with a single touch, and even alter his density so that he could fly or phase through walls. All I'm saying is that if this happens in the real world in 2022, then I think that's game over for us, guys.
Call me, well, how's about Shocker?
I've always found Shocker to be an underrated Spidey villain. Sure, the costume sometimes looks a little bit strange and silly, but I just don't think the villain gets enough credit. Maybe it's because one of the Shocker's names was Herman Schultz. I mean, with a name like that, you either become the assistant manager of a local bank or you become a supervillain. I'm sorry, those are the only two options. Yeah, Shocker usually isn't talked about in the same league as some of the other bigwigs in Spidey's rogue gallery, which is a real shame, because I think Shocker's Vibro Shock gauntlets are an incredibly powerful weapon. Also, maybe it's a branding thing, because when you hear Shocker, you expect some electroblasts, but that's not the case. The gauntlets can project a concentrated blast of air that vibrates at an intense frequency. This means that Shocker has both a solid long-range and short-range attack with his punches. It also means he can vibrate things in order to weaken the structural integrity, which doesn't sound that impressive, but imagine he uses the gauntlets against sides of buildings. Yeah, dangerous stuff. And the reason his suit looks so funny is that it's actually necessary. Anyone using the Shocker gauntlets usually deals with immense feedback that could seriously injure you, so the special suit makes them okay to use. And thank our lucky stars, we've had 2 Shockers already in the MCU. Sure, one was defeated easily and the other one was disintegrated, but hey, better than nothing. Alright, now we're getting into the heavy hitters. There's a reason why Doc Ock is one of Spidey's most formidable foes. Sure, Otto Octavius is a mad genius with an off-the-charts IQ, but he would really be nothing without his mechanical arms. It's a classic story. Scientist invents 4 tentacle-like arms to help him with science. People call him Dr. Octopus because they don't know how many arms an octopus has. Freak accident happens that establishes a mental link between the scientist and the now sorta sentient arms, and the rest is history. Yeah, if there was one mechanical-based weapon that Spider-Man could wish away forever, it would probably be these arms. They're an extreme nuisance to the webhead and really affect the fight. Like, by himself, Otto is just a kind of small, pudgy guy with a huge ego. One punch should really send him to the emergency room, but the arms provide a perfect barrier for all sorts of danger. They can instinctively block bullets, they're strong enough to rip people apart, and they're all over the place, so getting close to Otto with Spider-Man's natural agility and dexterity is often very difficult. There's been a few versions of the octopus arms throughout the years. Sometimes they're made from a titanium steel alloy that are powered by a small thermoelectric generator, and other times they're just made from adamantium. Either way, these are extremely dangerous to the webhead. Of course, I got to include the Goblin gear on here. After becoming infected with the Goblin formula, Norman Osborn went on a rampage as the Green Goblin. But it wasn't enough that he was now super strong and super crazy. No, he also went a step beyond and created a whole hodgepodge of new weapons to ruin Spider-Man's day. Like everything in the Green Goblin's arsenal just gives Spidey a major headache. The Goblin Glider is a sleek and stylish way to move around the city, you know, as long as Norman doesn't impale himself with it. But in his little utility belt, he has all sorts of gizmos and gadgets like explosive pumpkin bombs, razor bats, electro gauntlets, and so much more. Plus, he created safe houses all around the city that stores all these dangerous weapons so anyone could just stumble across them. I'm looking at you, Hobgoblin. Okay, even though the symbiotes are living things, I do think they're the absolute most powerful weapons against Spider-Man. The main reason is, of course, Venom, who spent time as Spidey's suit and developed an unhealthy bond with him. But this connection they formed made it so that Venom doesn't set off Spider-Man's spider sense. Peter Parker's biggest advantage in a fight is now gone against an opponent who's arguably stronger and faster than him. So that's really unfortunate. If that wasn't enough, when Venom had his offspring Carnage, who was even stronger than both Spider-Man and Venom, that red symbiote also inherited the ability to not set off the spider sense. So yeah, symbiotes are probably the most dangerous weapon you can use against Spider-Man because they'll know the inner workings of Spider-Man's psyche and are oftentimes quite evil. That's a bad combination right there.